"Do not let go of me now," Emily Harper whispered, though she was not sure whether she was speaking to the wolf, the river, or the last thin thread of strength left inside her. The Frostmere River roared beneath the broken ice like a living thing, black water twisting under white moonlight, hungry and cold enough to steal the breath from her lungs. Her fingers were numb. Her boots were soaked through. Every pull of the rope burned through her shoulders as if the winter itself had hooked into her bones and tried to drag her down. Behind her, 11 giant wolves lay scattered across the snow, their massive bodies trembling, their silver-tipped fur steaming faintly in the freezing air. One by one, she had pulled them out. One by one, she had wrapped her shaking arms around wet fur, tied rope around heavy bodies, and fought the current until her vision blurred. Now only the 12th remained. He was larger than the others, a black wolf with fur dark as a moonless forest and eyes like polished silver beneath a sheet of ice. He did not thrash. He did not beg. He watched her with a terrible stillness, as if he understood exactly how close she was to collapsing. The rope around his chest had caught beneath a jagged shelf of ice, and every time Emily pulled, the river answered with a cruel jerk that nearly tore her off her feet. "Come on," she breathed, her pale face wet with snow and river spray. "I did not come this far to leave you behind." The wolf's ears flicked at her voice. Something moved through his gaze then, not wildness, not fear, but recognition, deep and impossible, as if some ancient part of him had heard her before. Emily dug her heels into the snow and pulled again. The rope slid an inch. Then another. The ice cracked beneath her left knee. She froze. The sound spread across the river like glass whispering its own warning. 10 feet away, the wolf lifted his head, and for one impossible second, Emily felt as though he was the one trying to command her to stop. To save herself. To run back to shore and forget him. She almost laughed, but the sound came out as a broken breath. "You do not get to decide that," she whispered. "Not for me." The wind rose hard across Frostmere, throwing snow into her lashes. Somewhere behind her, one of the rescued wolves gave a low, weak sound. Another tried to stand and failed. Emily looked back at them, at the 11 lives breathing because she had refused to turn away, and something inside her tightened into a quiet, stubborn flame. She wrapped the rope twice around her forearm, leaned back with all her weight, and pulled. The black wolf surged forward as the ice released him. For a heartbeat, she thought she had one. Then the shelf beneath her shattered. Emily dropped waist-deep into the freezing river with a gasp that stole every word from her mouth. The current seized her instantly. The rope snapped tight between her and the wolf. Snow vanished. Sky vanished. There was only water, cold, darkness, and the silver eyes of the last wolf staring at her from the edge of the broken ice. Then, against all reason, he moved. Not away from her. Toward her. His massive jaws closed around the back of her coat, careful and firm, and with one final, powerful motion, the black wolf dragged Emily Harper out of the river she had entered to save him. Hours before the river took her breath away, Emily Harper had been standing at the back of the Blackpine Great Hall with a basket of torn winter cloaks in her arms, pretending not to hear the laughter that followed her name. The hall was warm enough to fog the high windows, bright with lanterns, pine garlands, and the silver banners of the winter hunt, but none of that warmth seemed to reach her. It never did. She was an Omega, and in Blackpine, that word was spoken like an apology before anyone bothered to learn the person beneath it. Her pale hands moved carefully over a ripped seam, pushing the needle through dark wool while warriors in polished boots crossed the floor around her as if she were a chair left in the wrong place. They spoke of strength, honor, bloodlines, and the glory of being chosen for the patrols near Frostmere, but when their eyes landed on Emily, all they saw was softness. A girl who could calm frightened horses. A girl who remembered which elders needed extra blankets. A girl who carried warm broth to sick children. And never asked for credit. Useful, perhaps, but never important. The loudest voice belonged to Tyler Voss, a young beta with a smile too smooth to be kind. He stopped beside her basket and lifted one of the cloaks between two fingers. "Careful with that, Emily," he said, letting the others hear. "That fabric belongs to wolves who actually go outside when danger comes." A few people laughed. Emily kept her gaze down and tied off the thread. She had learned long ago that silence could be armor, even when it felt thin as paper. Across the hall, Mara Whitcomb, the acting Luna of Blackpine, watched from the raised table with cool blue eyes. Mara was beautiful in the way winter could be beautiful, sharp, pale, and impossible to touch without feeling the cold. She had been ruling Blackpine while the Alpha traveled south, and she enjoyed order more than mercy. "Emily," Mara called, and the sound carried cleanly through the room. The hall quieted at once. Emily set the cloak down and stepped forward, still holding the needle between her fingers. "Yes, ma'am." Mara gestured toward a small leather pouch resting near the ceremonial table. "The moonroot salve for tonight's hunt is missing." A slow unease moved through Emily. That pouch had been there earlier. She had seen Tyler place his cup beside it. She had seen him laugh too loudly when no one was looking. But the room was already turning toward her, already choosing the easiest answer. "I did not take it," Emily said softly. Mara's expression did not change. "No one said you stole it. But you were assigned to prepare supplies, were you not?" Heat rose in Emily's face. Around her, whispers began to gather like snow against a door. Tyler folded his arms, his smile almost invisible. Maybe she packed it with the wrong gear. Omegas get nervous around important things. Emily's fingers tightened around the needle until the metal bit into her glove. She wanted to speak. She wanted, just once, for her voice to matter more than their suspicion. But Mara stood, and the hall obeyed her before she said another word. "If the supplies were mishandled, then you will check the outer traps yourself. Frostmere first. The storm may bury them by morning." The command landed in the room with the weight of a closed gate. Frostmere was 3 miles from the hall, farther if the drifts had covered the low road. No one was supposed to walk there alone after dark, not in a winter storm, not with the river half frozen and the forest restless beyond it. Emily looked toward the warriors, hoping one of them would step forward, not for her, but for basic decency. No one moved. Mara lifted a white fur cloak from the back of her chair, considered it, then handed Emily a thin gray one from a servant's hook instead. "You wanted to be useful," she said. "Be useful." Emily took the cloak with both hands. It was not warm enough. Everyone knew it. That was why the silence hurt more than the laughter. She walked out beneath the watching eyes of Blackpine with her chin level and her heart quietly breaking, unaware that the path they had sent her down in shame would lead her to 12 lives in the ice, and to one wolf whose name would make every soul in that hall fall to their knees. The storm met Emily at the great hall doors like it had been waiting for her. Wind swept across the courtyard, carrying snow and hard white ribbons that stung her cheeks and blurred the lanterns behind her into trembling golden smears. For one breath, she stood beneath the carved archway and listened to the muffled warmth she had just left behind, music rising again, boots crossing polished floor, voices returning to celebration as if sending one Omega into the winter was nothing more than closing a window. Emily pulled the thin gray cloak around her shoulders and stepped down into the snow. It came nearly to her shins in the lower yard, soft on top but packed hard beneath, making every step slow. Frostmere was 3 miles away by the ridge path, past the old trapline, past the cedar grove where the wind always seemed to speak in voices. She knew the way. Blackpine had given her every unwanted task since she was 16, and the unwanted paths had become her map of the world. The cold reached her fingers first, then her ears, then the quiet place behind her ribs where hurt settled when she had no safe place to put it. She kept walking. Overhead, the moon was hidden behind a thick ceiling of clouds, but the snow gave off its own pale light, enough for her to see the dark shapes of pines bending under winter weight. Her boots slipped once on a patch of ice, and she caught herself against a tree, breathing hard. The needle she had forgotten to put down still rested in her glove. She looked at it, small and silver, almost ridiculous against the size of the storm, then tucked it into her pocket. A needle could not save her from wolves, weather, or Mara Whitcomb, but it had fixed hundreds of torn things. There was comfort in that. Halfway to the river, she reached the first trap marker, a red strip of cloth tied around a cedar branch. The snare beneath it was empty, half buried, exactly as it should have been. She brushed snow from the post and moved on. The second was empty too. The third had snapped shut around a fallen branch. Emily knelt to reset it, her breath shaking in the cold, and that was when she noticed the first strange sign in the snow, a wide drag mark crossing the trail from east to west, too broad for a deer, too deep for loose branches. Beside it were paw prints. Enormous paw prints. Emily rose slowly. Blackpine wolves were large, but these tracks were different, longer than her hand, pressed deep enough to reveal the dark earth beneath the snow. There were many of them, overlapping, stumbling, leading toward the river. Her pulse quickened. A patrol, perhaps. Royal wolves, perhaps. The thought made her uneasy. Royal packs did not cross minor territories without warning, and no one in the hall had mentioned visitors. She followed the tracks, not because she was brave, not at first, but because leaving them unexplained felt worse. The wind shifted as she neared Frostmere, bringing with it the sharp smell of river ice and something else beneath it, something metallic and bitter, like silver charms left too long in cold rain. Emily stopped at the top of the final ridge. Below her, the Frostmere River cut through the valley in a black, restless line, half frozen, half alive. Sheets of ice knocked against each other with hollow sounds that carried through the storm. The trap posts near the bank leaned crookedly, their red markers whipping in the wind. Then she heard it. A sound so low she might have mistaken it for the river, except it rose at the end with pain and fear and a plea no language needed to translate. Emily turned toward the bend where the ice narrowed. Another sound followed. Then another. Her heart began to pound. She ran the last 50 yards, slipping down the snowy bank, branches catching at her cloak. When she reached the river edge, the world seemed to fall silent around what waited there. Beyond a broken shelf of ice, 12 giant wolves struggled in the freezing water, caught among ropes, shattered branches, and silver-lined trap cables that glimmered faintly beneath the stormlight. Some kicked weakly toward the bank. Some only held their heads above water, their breath coming in white bursts. And farthest from shore, almost hidden by blowing snow, a black wolf larger than all the rest watched Emily with silver eyes that did not look wild at all. They looked royal. They looked aware. They looked as if he had been waiting for someone who should never have come alone. For a moment, Emily could not move. The river was too loud, the storm too wide, the sight before her too impossible to fit inside a single breath. 12 wolves, each one larger than any she had ever seen, were trapped among broken ice and silver-lined cables that tightened whenever the current shifted. Their fur was thick with frost. Their paws clawed carefully at slick edges that would not hold. The nearest wolf turned its amber eyes toward her, and the sound it made was not a snarl. It was a plea. Emily dropped to her knees at the bank and reached for the closest trap post, searching with stiff fingers for the release hook. The metal was buried beneath ice. She scraped at it with her gloves, then with the small needle from her pocket, chipping away until the frozen latch gave a sharp click. A cable loosened in the water. The nearest wolf surged toward the bank, but the current pulled it sideways, dragging it back against a half-sunken log. Emily lunged forward and caught the end of the rope tied to the post. It burned through her gloves as she wrapped it around both hands. "Hold on," she called, though she knew the wolf could not answer. "I have you." She leaned back with everything she had. Snow slid beneath her boots. Her knees struck the bank. The wolf kicked once, twice, then found enough ground to scramble onto a shelf of ice near the shore. Emily kept pulling until its front paws reached snow. It collapsed there, breathing hard, steam rising from its coat. She stared at it, stunned by the fact that she had actually done it. Then another low sound rose from the river, and hope became urgency. There were 11 more. Emily looked downstream. The second wolf was tangled near a fallen cedar. The third had its paws braced against a floating slab. Farther out, the black wolf remained almost motionless, silver eyes fixed on her as if measuring not her strength, but her choice. Emily stood, swaying. She was one person, an omega with numb hands and a cloak too thin for a mild winter morning, let alone a storm like this. Even if she freed one or two, she could not pull all of them from Frostmere alone. Not in time. She turned and ran up the bank, slipping twice before she reached the ridge. The lights of the Blackpine guard station glowed through the snowfall less than a quarter-mile away. Relief struck her so suddenly that it almost hurt. Men were there. Ropes were there. Horses, sleds, lanterns, strong hands, all the things she did not have. She stumbled toward the station, waving both arms as the first guard stepped under the porch lantern. "Help me," she shouted over the wind. "There are wolves in the river. 12 of them. They are trapped near the lower bend." The guard, Mason Reed, stared at her as if she had brought him a childish nightmare instead of an emergency. 2 others appeared behind him, wrapped in heavy fur cloaks, their faces tightening when she pointed back toward Frostmere. "Royal-sized wolves," one muttered. "Not Blackpine." Emily grabbed the porch rail to stay upright. "That does not matter. They are freezing." Mason looked past her into the storm, then back at the thin gray cloak on her shoulders. "You should not have gone near them. I was ordered to check the traps. And now? You are ordered to come inside and be quiet until Mara decides what to do." Emily stared at him. Behind her, somewhere through the snow, another desperate howl broke against the night. It was weaker this time. Mason heard it. They all did. No one moved. Something in Emily went still, not calm, not fearless, but clear. She let go of the porch rail and stepped backward into the storm. "Then I will go back without you," she said, and turned before they could stop her. Emily ran back toward Frostmere with the storm pushing against her like a locked door. Behind her, the guard station lights blurred and faded, swallowed by blowing snow, and with them went the last easy chance that anyone stronger would come in time. Her breath came sharp and thin. Her legs trembled from the cold and from the terrible knowledge that every second she spent away from the river might cost a life. When she reached the ridge, the sound below nearly stopped her heart. The wolves were quieter now. The river had not grown gentler, but they had. That frightened her more than any howl. Emily slid down the bank, caught herself against a frozen root, and grabbed the rope she had left tied around the first trap post. The nearest rescued wolf lifted its head from the snow and watched her with amber eyes, weak but awake. "Stay there," she whispered, though the words shook. "Please, just stay warm." The second wolf was still caught near the fallen cedar, its front paws braced against ice that kept breaking beneath it. Emily wrapped the rope around the cedar trunk, tied the kind of knot she had learned from mending wagon straps, and threw the loose end as far as she could. It landed short. She pulled it back and threw again. This time the wolf caught it gently between its teeth, as if it understood. "Good," Emily breathed. "Now hold." She leaned her weight backward and pulled. Inch by inch, with the rope creaking and the current fighting every motion, the second wolf reached the shallows and climbed onto the bank. Emily did not wait to celebrate. The third wolf was farther out. The fourth had drifted against a shelf of ice. The fifth was tangled so tightly that Emily had to crawl along the edge and loosen the cable with fingers she could barely feel. Each rescue took something from her. Warmth. Strength. The steady rhythm of her breathing. By the time the sixth wolf reached the snow, her gray cloak had frozen stiff along the hem, and her hair clung to her face in pale wet strands. She stumbled once and stayed on her knees longer than she meant to. The black wolf farthest from shore lifted his head. His silver gaze found her through the storm. Again, she felt that strange command in him, silent but clear. Stop. Leave. Live. Emily pressed one hand into the snow and forced herself upright. I already told you, she whispered toward him. I do not leave people behind. The seventh wolf was younger than the others, still enormous, but lighter, frightened enough to shake as Emily guided it over the broken ice. When it reached her, it pressed its cold nose briefly against her sleeve before collapsing beside the others. The simple touch nearly undid her. No one in Blackpine had looked at her that way in years, as if her presence meant safety instead of shame. She moved to the eighth, then the ninth. The ninth nearly slipped back when the rope caught under ice, and Emily threw herself backward, boots carving lines through the snow until the knot came free. The 10th took all her remaining strength. The 11th left her hands shaking so badly that she had to use her teeth to tighten the rope. Around her, 11 giant wolves lay in a half circle, breathing, watching, waiting. None of them ran. None of them turned away. They all looked past her, toward the last wolf in the river. The black one. The largest one. The one the others seemed to fear losing most. Emily followed their gaze and saw why. The final cable was not around his leg. It was caught across his shoulder beneath the ice, pinning him where the current was strongest. He was holding still not because he was weak, but because one wrong movement would pull him farther under. Emily stepped toward the broken edge, and the wind dropped for one breath, as if even the storm wanted to see what she would choose. Then the black wolf opened his silver eyes fully, and Emily understood with a shiver deeper than cold. That this was no ordinary wolf waiting in the water. Emily lowered herself onto the ice before fear could teach her another reason to turn back. The surface groaned beneath her weight, a long, thin sound that traveled under her palms and up through her arms. 10 feet away, the black wolf watched her with silver eyes that held too much understanding. The other wolves had struggled, pleaded, reached for the shore with every ounce of strength they had left. This one did none of that. He stayed still in the current, not because he had surrendered, but because he was protecting everyone from what might happen if he moved too suddenly. Emily could feel it without knowing how. The river was not only holding him. It was waiting for him to fight. Easy, she whispered, sliding forward on her stomach, spreading her weight the way old hunters taught children to do near thin ice. I am coming to you. The wolf gave a low rumble, soft but unmistakable, and the sound carried a warning. Emily paused. Snow collected on her lashes. Her breath shook white between them. I know, she said, though no one had spoken. It is dangerous. She moved another foot. The silver-lined cable disappeared beneath the broken ice near his shoulder, pinned under a wedge of frozen driftwood. Every pull from the current tightened it. She could not reach the latch from shore. She could not cut it with her tiny needle. She could only get close enough to free it by hand. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it made the world strangely simple. One trapped life. 2 frozen hands. One choice. Emily stretched across the ice until her fingers brushed the cable. Cold shot through her gloves, sharp and immediate. The black wolf's eyes narrowed, and his head turned toward her wrist. At first, she thought he was looking at the rope burns on her skin. Then she felt it. A warmth beneath her pulse, faint as a candle behind a closed door. It spread from her chest down her arms, slow and golden, answering the weakness in him, the exhaustion in the other wolves, the pain woven through the storm itself. Emily froze, startled by her own body. Omegas in Blackpine were not supposed to have power. They soothed. They served. They stayed small. But the warmth kept growing, gathering in her palms until light shimmered under her wet gloves. The cable beneath her fingers loosened. Not broke. Not snapped. Loosened, as if the cold metal had remembered mercy. The black wolf drew a careful breath. Emily pressed both hands around the cable and poured every gentle thing she had ever been mocked for into that single touch. Every blanket she had carried. Every frightened child she had calmed. Every wounded creature she had refused to ignore. The golden light brightened. The trapped cable slipped free from the ice. For one suspended second, the river went quiet. Then the black wolf surged toward her, heavy and magnificent, and Emily caught the rope around his chest with the last of her strength. The current pulled back. The ice cracked beneath her knees. She leaned away from the river and pulled, not like a warrior, not like an alpha, but like a girl who had spent her whole life holding broken things together until they could survive the night. The wolf reached the edge. His front paws struck snow. Emily tried to stand, but her legs failed her. The world tilted white and silver. Before she could fall into the water again, the black wolf pushed forward and caught the back of her coat gently between his teeth, drawing her away from the broken ice. She collapsed beside him in the snow, one hand still resting against his dark fur, where the strange golden warmth faded into a quiet glow beneath her skin. Around them, the 11 rescued wolves lifted their heads as one, and every pair of eyes turned toward the black wolf with reverence Emily did not yet understand. Emily did not know how long she lay in the snow with her hand tangled in the black wolf's fur. Time had narrowed to breath, cold, and the slow fading pulse of golden warmth beneath her palms. Around her, the 11 wolves did not scatter into the trees. They rose one by one, shaking snow from their coats, moving with care despite their exhaustion until they formed a wide circle around her and the black wolf. Their bodies blocked the worst of the wind. Their shoulders faced outward. Their heads turned toward the ridge. Emily followed their gaze through the blowing snow and saw lanterns moving in the distance. For one hopeful second, she thought the guards had changed their minds. Then she heard Mara Whitcomb's voice carrying above the storm, sharp enough to cut through the river's roar. There she is. Emily tried to push herself upright, but the black wolf shifted closer, steadying her with the warmth of his side. The movement was small, almost gentle, but the 11 wolves reacted at once, lowering their heads as if awaiting an order. That was when the first Blackpine warriors reached the bank. Mason Reed came with them, his heavy cloak dusted in snow, his face pale beneath the lantern light. Tyler Voss stood just behind him, no longer smiling. Mara arrived last, wrapped in white fur and escorted by 2 senior betas, her eyes sweeping over the scene as if the river, the wolves, and the half-frozen Omega were all problems placed there to inconvenience her. Emily Harper, Mara said, step away from those animals. Emily blinked up at her. Her voice came out rough, but steady. They were trapped. You had no authority to interfere with royal traplines. Emily looked at the silver cables half buried in the broken ice. Royal traplines do not belong in Blackpine waters. The word surprised even her. A hush fell over the bank. Tyler's gaze snapped toward Mara, then away again too quickly. The black wolf beside Emily let out a low sound, not loud, not wild, but deep enough that the lantern flames trembled. Every Blackpine warrior took a step back. Mara lifted her chin, refusing to show fear. You do not understand what you have touched, girl. Emily's fingers tightened in the black fur. I understood enough to know they were dying. Mason looked at the 11 wolves now standing between Blackpine and the river. Ma'am, he said carefully, those markings on their shoulders. Mara silenced him with a glance, but it was too late. Emily saw the markings too. Beneath the frost, each rescued wolf bore the same pale crest in its fur, a crown-shaped streak near the left shoulder, subtle but unmistakable now that the snow had begun to melt. She had seen that crest only once before. Embroidered high above the ceremonial table in the great hall, beneath the words Northern Crown. Royal blood. Royal Guard. The thought moved through the group like thunder without sound. Tyler took another step back. Mara's face tightened. Emily looked down at the black wolf beside her, and the world seemed to hold its breath. He was watching Mara now, silver eyes calm, ancient, and filled with a command no acting Luna could imitate. Slowly, the 11 wolves turned inward. One by one, they lowered themselves into the snow, not in weakness, not in fear, but in honor. They bowed their heads before the black wolf. Emily forgot the cold. She forgot the river. She forgot every cruel word ever spoken in that hall. Because behind her, Mason Reed dropped to one knee, his lantern falling softly into the snow. "Moon above," he whispered. "That is not a stray wolf." The black wolf rose to his full height beside Emily, towering over the riverbank as the storm quieted around him, and every person present finally understood that the Omega they had sent into the dark had not found danger at Frostmere. She had found a king. The black wolf stood over the broken ice with the storm bending around him, and for the first time that night, no one on the riverbank dared to speak. Emily felt the change before she understood it. The air grew heavier, not with danger, but with authority, the kind that made every branch, every lantern flame, every shaken breath seem to wait for permission. The 11 rescued wolves remained bowed in the snow, their heads lowered toward the great black wolf as if the cold ground beneath him had become a throne. Mara Whitcomb took one careful step back. Her white cloak moved in the wind, but her face had gone still. "That is impossible," she whispered. The black wolf turned his silver eyes on her. He did not bare his teeth. He did not need to. The quiet was more powerful than rage. Then light moved across his fur, faint at first, like moonlight sliding over deep water. Emily pulled her hand away, startled, but the wolf lowered his head toward her, gentle enough that his nose brushed the torn edge of her glove. The warmth in her palms answered again, soft and golden. Snow lifted around them in a slow spiral. The shape before her began to change, not violently, not like the frightening stories told to children, but with the solemn grace of something ancient returning to itself. Fur became shadow-dark clothing. Paws became steady hands. The massive wolf form rose into the figure of a man standing tall beside the river, broad-shouldered beneath a long black coat edged in frost, his dark hair swept back by the wind, his pale skin marked by winter light, his silver eyes unchanged. Every Blackpine wolf knew him before Mason found the courage to say the name. Alpha King Nathaniel Blackwood. The words fell into the snow, and the bank collapsed into reverence. Warriors dropped to one knee. Mason bowed his head. Tyler sank so fast his lantern tipped sideways into the drift. Even Mara lowered herself, though pride fought every inch of the motion. Emily tried to move back, but her body would not obey. Cold, exhaustion, and shock pinned her in place. She had touched him. She had argued with him without words. She had called him stubborn, perhaps not aloud, but close enough. Her face flushed despite the freezing air. She started to kneel like the others, but Nathaniel reached out and caught her wrist before she could fall. His hand was warm around her frozen glove, steady but careful, as though she were something precious and breakable. "No," he said, his voice low, calm, and carrying across the riverbank. "Not you." Emily looked up at him, unable to breathe properly. The king turned his gaze to the others. 12 wolves of the Northern Crown crossed this territory under peace banners. We were caught in silver-lined traps hidden beneath the river ice. His eyes moved to Mara, and the silence sharpened. And when your guards heard us calling, they stayed warm behind a locked door. Mara's lips parted, but no answer came. Nathaniel looked back at Emily, and the storm seemed to soften around his voice. This Omega came alone. The word Omega no longer sounded small when he said it. It sounded honored. She had no command, no army, no promise of reward. She had only her hands and a heart stronger than the fear around her. Emily swallowed hard, tears warming her eyes before the cold could steal them. "I only did what anyone should have done," she whispered. Nathaniel's expression changed then, not into a smile exactly, but into something gentler and far more dangerous to every lie Blackpine had ever told about her worth. "That is why it was you," he said. Behind them, the 11 royal wolves lifted their heads as one, and on Emily's wrist, beneath his hand, a thin silver mark began to glow. The silver mark on Emily's wrist brightened beneath Nathaniel's hand, thin as a crescent moon at first, then unfolding into a delicate pattern of light that curled around her skin like frost finding a windowpane. Every wolf on the riverbank saw it. Every bowed head lifted just enough to stare. Emily stared too, unable to understand how something so quiet could silence so many people at once. The warmth that had saved the black wolf returned to her palms, not burning, not frightening, but steady, as if a door inside her had opened and found the place it had always belonged. Mara Wickham went pale beneath the lantern light. "That cannot be," she said, but her voice no longer carried authority. It carried fear of being wrong in front of the truth. Nathaniel turned toward her, his hand still supporting Emily's wrist. "Be careful with your next words." He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The moon does not ask permission from pride. Emily's breath caught. Around them, the 11 royal wolves rose from the snow and shifted back into men and women dressed in dark winter travel clothes, each one marked with the crest of the northern crown. They stood behind Nathaniel with quiet dignity, alive because Emily had refused to measure their worth before saving them. One woman with silver-streaked hair stepped forward and bowed to Emily, not deeply enough to frighten her, but enough to make every Blackpine warrior understand what was happening. "We owe you our lives," she said. Emily shook her head, overwhelmed. "You do not owe me anything." The woman's eyes softened. "That is why we do." Tyler Voss knelt with his head lowered, his earlier laughter buried under the weight of the moment. "Mason." Reed could not meet Emily's eyes. Mara remained still, trapped between apology and disbelief. Emily looked at them all and expected anger to rise in her, sharp and satisfying. Instead, she felt only the ache of how tired she was, and the strange sadness of realizing how little it would have cost them to be kind. Nathaniel seemed to understand. He removed his black royal cloak and placed it gently around her shoulders, covering the thin gray one Blackpine had sent her into the storm wearing. The cloak was heavy, warm, and edged with the same silver crest that now shimmered faintly on her wrist. "Emily Harper," he said, and hearing her name in his voice made it feel whole for the first time that night. "Before this river, you were treated as if gentleness made you weak. Tonight, gentleness saved 12 lives, exposed a hidden wrong, and awakened a bond no crown can command." Emily looked up at him. Snow clung to his dark hair. His silver eyes held no pity, only respect. "What does it mean?" she whispered. Nathaniel lowered his gaze to the glowing mark, then back to her face. "It means destiny recognized you before this kingdom did." The words moved through the gathered wolves like dawn breaking across frozen ground. One by one, the Blackpine warriors bowed lower, not to erase what they had done, but to acknowledge what they had failed to see. Mara finally lowered her head. "Emily," she said quietly, "I was wrong." Emily did not answer at once. She listened to the river, calmer now, carrying broken ice beneath the moon. Then she pulled Nathaniel's cloak tighter around her shoulders and found her voice. "Then start by helping them warm the injured and by opening the hall to every traveler under your protection." Mara blinked, startled by the command. Nathaniel's mouth curved faintly, proud but restrained. "You heard her." Within minutes, lanterns moved, sleds were brought, and the same doors that had closed behind Emily in shame were opened wide for the wolves she had saved. As they walked back toward Blackpine, Nathaniel stayed beside her, matching his pace to hers. At the top of the ridge, Emily looked back once at Frostmere, at the dark river that had nearly taken everything and somehow returned her life changed. Nathaniel followed her gaze. "You pulled us from the water one by one," he said softly. "But I think you were the one the moon meant to bring home." Emily looked down at the silver mark glowing beneath the edge of his cloak, and for the first time in years, the word Omega did not feel like a sentence. It felt like a beginning.